Talk about the thing you did the other day.
Good evening. You are here with Courtside with Lawman and Carmen B. This evening's episode, we're going to discuss police encounters and how to survive them. We want you to be able to survive any police encounter that you have with any law enforcement agency. And we feel that there are a few tips that if you follow, that will prevent that. I would additionally like to remind you that this show is for educational and informational purposes for the public. It does not establish an attorney client relationship between Mr. Staten and anyone or myself and anyone, but we do want to be able to educate the public, and that's what we're here to do. Lawman?
All right. Hello, everyone. When it comes to police encounters, we're going to be using a lot of the Fourth and Fifth Amendments of the Constitution to guide us. In fact, Carmen gave a presentation just a while ago about police encounters and how to survive them. And that's really the purpose, is surviving them. Because if you do not survive them, then that's a problem, isn't there? So here's the thing. I learned from Maya Angelou that if you want somebody, to change and they won't, really what you got to do is change yourself. You have to look at things from a different angle. So the things that we teach, the things that I talk about are suggestions that if you put into operation, they will work for you, that you walk away, that you probably never get harassed, and it, a bad encounter can become a good experience, let's just say. So, Carm, you want to tell me a little bit about your presentation and what was that all about?
Well, it was a presentation of what you should do if it was about your constitutional rights, but which impact what you should do when you encounter law enforcement. One of the very first things you should ask, if an officer says to you, "Hey, stop," you should ask, "Am I free to leave?" If the answer to that question is yes, then you should leave. If the answer to that question is no, you have now been detained. Now, the officer, and we talked about this previously, I believe, has to have reasonable, articulable suspicion in order to detain you. But when an officer stops you, you don't know what information that officer has. You don't know if he's investigating a crime or whether or not he's stopping you just to harass you. And he may not provide that information. That is why it is extremely important for you to ask that one question: Am I free to leave? You don't have to answer his questions about where you're going or where you're coming from or who you've been with. Start with asking, "Officer, am I free to leave?" If he says that you're free to leave, walk away. If he says no, then you have been detained. You can provide your name and your ID. You don't need to answer any further questions beyond that. And you should not request, you should demand, "I want my attorney," or "I want an attorney."
Now, that sounds pretty simple. And people go, yeah, but you know what? I got this First Amendment right and I got this mouth. So I feel like telling them what I feel. I feel like expressing myself at that particular time. I want to know, why did you stop me? What were you thinking about, cop? What did you eat today? See, I threw that last line in there because that's a ridiculous thing to say. And compare it to the other things, it's also ridiculous things to say under the law. What you should only say is, "Am I free to leave?" Because you got a First Amendment to talk, right, Carm?
You do, you do.
But you don't have to use it.
No, this is not the time to use it.
That's
This is
right.
the time to assert your Fifth Amendment privilege to remain silent.
And that's very important because what usually happens is once somebody says, well, what did you stop me for? Or why are you messing with me? What happens?
Then the officer gets in it becomes kind of for lack of a better term, a pissing match, right? The officer, whether he had a reason or whether it's purely to harass you, that conversation usually never ends well. We think it's extremely rare that we see it end well.
True. And you know what we have to be is very clear about your conduct. Okay. And the things that we say are backed up by the Constitution and case law. In fact, People versus Rohrer, which, and I think it's not People, but the Rohrer Supreme Court case,
Yes.
1983, tells you that as a citizen, meaning anyone in the public of the United States, you don't ever have to talk to police officers. You don't have to answer questions. You don't have to respond to questions. The only thing that you should probably do is ask, are you free to leave? And if you are not, then you are detained. And what that means is the officer must have, what's that word?
Reasonable, articulable suspicion for stopping you. But at that time is not the time for you to raise that issue or litigate with the officer about whether or not he has that suspicion. You leave that to us to do in the courtroom.
Correct.
Unfortunately, we saw earlier this week the tapes that came out of Southern California for a killing, a murder that happened by law enforcement officers who were actually assigned to a homeless detail. And I believe the actual incident happened back in September, but for whatever reason, here we are months later, just now getting the footage. The officers didn't have on body cameras, so what we have are the views, I believe, of someone who was recording with their cell phone, and then I think a nearby hotel. In that instance, that the gentleman who was murdered by the police attempted to assert his right to, under that Royer case, to simply walk away. But the officers were not having it. And in their mind, they had discussed whether or not they had a reason to stop him for, I believe it was something so minute as jaywalking. And they weren't even sure that they had reasonable, articulable suspicion to stop this man. But they stopped him or attempted to stop him anyway. He felt that he had done nothing wrong, and it seems like he had done nothing wrong, and he tried to walk away from the officers, and then the officers physically put their hands on him. Now, we would have liked to have been able to see and he did ask, I believe, that question that Keith suggests that you not ask, why are you stopping me? What did I do? But once the officers physically put their hands on him, we could tell that that encounter was not going to go well, and it did not go well, and it resulted in those officers taking his life for what started as a jaywalking stop.
Now, let me tell you, the video does show that he's walking across a street. And the street is a street where traffic passes. And it may, I don't believe it had a crosswalk at that time, but that's why the officers were debating whether or not it's a true jaywalking, because jaywalking is not just crossing not at the crosswalk, but when you're crossing, you impede traffic. You make someone slow down, you make traffic react to you. It's very similar to, I think it's 22107 and 22108 of the vehicle code, of whether or not you have to use your turn signals. The law states when you are going to turn, you should use your turn signals. But if there is no one affecting you, no one who you would be affecting, meaning no one's following close behind you who needs to know you're going to turn, then you don't have to use your turn signals. So, as to jaywalking, if there's no cars coming in either direction for quite a while, I should be able to walk across that street. That whole pedestrians have the right of way theory. But that's why we make crosswalks, so that we can put pedestrians in a place where all drivers should know you must stop at that crosswalk. So, jaywalking, maybe, maybe not. But when the officers come up and want to talk to him and say, hey, come with me or stop or anything like that, there's really only one thing to say. Am I free to leave? Am I free to go? And they'll say no.
Now, I think in this particular incident, the man that they killed, it's my understanding that he was homeless. He may have had some mental issues. So, in those circumstances, someone with mental issues may not have the wherewithal to know what I need to do is ask, am I free to leave? And if these cops say no, um, then I realize that I'm detained and I have to stand here and listen to whatever it is they're saying, but I don't have to talk to them other than providing my name and my ID.
Correct.
In the instances where someone has mental issues like that, we see that it's not going to play out good. This is not the first person with some mental issues that has been murdered by law enforcement. And so, in those particular instances, I think there needs to be a different culture of training with law enforcement. Law enforcement, there's certain things they don't need to respond to, and there should be certain rules about when there can be actual physical conduct. And I don't think in a jaywalking case that an officer should be allowed to physically place their hands upon someone. There was no threat to the officers. He didn't have a weapon. No one had called in any type of crime. And these officers, it's my understanding, actually knew this man, had had interactions with him before. So it's not as if they had wanted to write him a citation and hand it to him at a later time, they wouldn't have been able to do it.
Now, mental illness. We have a problem in society with that, in that we do not have a way of treating individuals who are adults who do not want to take their medication. Many times, our homeless are mentally ill. Now, they know enough to survive on the streets. You know, they know when they need to eat, when they need to do things, but they may not know how to respond in confrontational situations. And it's one of the things that our society has got to deal with. And what Carmen's talking about is in certain jurisdictions, they are now, when you recognize that a person may be mentally ill and having some sort of manic attack or something like that, that you don't send out the cops. You send out individuals who might be social workers who are sensitive to such things and they are used to such things and they've learned to de-escalate the manic attack that's going on with the individual. So I think the guy in that situation was actually acting like anyone else probably would. You're crossing a street and the cops say, hey, come here, hey, stop, or anything like that. You will wonder, why are you stopping me? What do you want with me? And officers may do that, but you got to remember the Supreme Court of the United States says that you do not have to talk to them. So you have to ask one question: am I free to go? Now, one of the reasons why you do that is because what it does is it now invokes your Fourth Amendment right. It brings fire to it, let's just say. Because a lot of people get confused as to, well, what's reasonable suspicion? Well, it's not you that have to have it, it's the cops that have to articulate what it is. And when that happens, and I'm going to talk after giving back to Carm a little bit on reasonable suspicion versus probable cause, because a lot of people will mix that up and they don't know, well, what does that really mean, reasonable suspicion? But I'm going to try to talk about it, put it in the format of operation out on the streets. You know, what is suspicion? Use a few examples to show you that we're not talking about the same suspicion that someone may have for someone, and how the officers have to break that down. But when you fight them, when you disobey and want to run, want to continually clash, they kick it up a level into now you're resisting. Now you're obstructing justice and things like that. So we want to leave it at a level of reasonable suspicion needs to be shown by the officer.
So I'm going to say this, lawman. There's some people who would say to that, so what you want me to do is basically you want me to live on my knees for these officers. And I'm not going to do that.
That's right. You shouldn't do that.
And
And
we're not telling you to do that.
sure.
What we're telling you is let us fight that fight. We are the ones who will determine whether or not the officer had sufficient reasonable articulable suspicion
Right.
to have contacted you, to have detained you. Let us fight that fight. We don't want you fighting it because, yes, you will be able to show instances where someone argued with the cop and then the cop let them go, right? They ran into the right cop on that day. The problem is there are too many wrong cops out there that you run into on that day. And again, our purpose is we want you to survive that encounter.
Right.
You survive that encounter, and then we'll do the fighting for you in court.
Right. And, you know, it- you got to put everything in perspective. Why do these things exist? Why does the law exist? Why do officers exist? Because they have, let's just say, for lack of a better word, power or permission to investigate crimes. They have the power to arrest. They have the power to detain and all of that stuff. It's just when they exercise their power, we want to make sure that they follow the law. That's all. So I always say, look, you kind of know when a cop may be coming sometimes, right? Either behind you. And I mean, look, pulled over. First thing, am I free to go? See, stop in a mall. Am I free to go? It doesn't matter. They can come at you with guns. Am I free to go? Because what has to happen is when that situation goes down, you've got to now kick it into your right brain, your senses. You got to know, okay, let me deal with this. And the best way to deal with it is you first got to calm yourself. You see, first thing is you got to calm yourself because you're getting worked up. Uh-oh, cops behind me. Oh no, what do they want? Oh, this guy, I see him. He's going to stop me. What do they want? Many times we ask that question, right? What do they want? And are they doing this? Are they profiling me because I'm black? Because I'm brown? See, we are asking that question before the encounter even. So we've already put it in our mind, they're bothering me. And because our Constitution contains that Fourth Amendment, which came from the settlers who said, we do not want the state to bother us. And if they do bother us, then they must articulate why they're doing it. You see, they just can't willy nilly bother people. But if people don't check them, don't exercise their rights, they end up killing people over something as small as crossing the street, as small as walking through a park, as small as being a passenger in a vehicle. So it's us who have to change our perspective. And that's what I meant by that quote of Maya Angelou. See, I'm not going to make them stop. They're not going to stop. But I'm going to change my attitude towards it. And then I am able to calm the situation. So before I get off on a reasonable suspicion and probable cause, Carm, you want to talk a little bit more about what happened to the guy and why?
I would just, before I do that, remind that if anyone has a question, they can reach us via the chat. They can also reach us via the phone at 916-384-8204. Again, 916-384-8204. In that particular instance, the gentleman did say that he hadn't done anything wrong. He asked them, they said jaywalking. There was some discussion about jaywalking where. I think the officer said near the liquor store. But the officer kept putting his hands on the man, and the man, told him to stop. And there were two officers. And so, of course, the two officers both physically grabbed him, got him down on the ground, and he was struggling, it appeared to me, to try and get away from the officers, when one of the officers said something to the effect of, his hand is on my gun, or something to that effect. And then the other officer shot him. We do have a question in the chat. If law enforcement tells you that they are going to issue a citation, do you have to tell them your name then? We've already said that when law enforcement contacts you, you can provide your name and your identification, but you don't need to provide anything else beyond that. And if you're not free to leave, state that you want your attorney.
Right. Now,
Oh, I'm sorry.
oh,
There's one other point I want to address
yeah,
that you mentioned, lawman. You said if the cops come at you with their guns drawn, ask,
exactly.
are you free to leave? In that instance, I'm going to say you don't need to ask, are you free to leave at that point? Because it is clear if guns are out, that you are not free to leave. And no reasonable person would believe that they were free to leave under those circumstances. So under that circumstance, it is a given that you are being detained, um, and you want to try and comply. Just because sometimes what can happen is you have one officer that's a little antsy, and when those guns are out, even though they shouldn't have their fingers on the trigger, finger doesn't go on the trigger until you're ready to shoot. But all you need is an officer who's not properly trained, who has his finger on that trigger, and you make a move, and next thing you know, now they've shot you. We don't want that to happen. Um, we want you to be able to survive these encounters.
Well, let's talk about that. I say I'm going to disagree with Carl on if they come at you with guns, because sometimes it may be in a car situation, it may be walking down the street. The power of Am I Free to Leave is that it does now force the officers to have that reasonable suspicion at that particular time that you are engaged in criminal conduct or about to engage in criminal conduct. So it leads me, though, into this. Let's talk about what reasonable suspicion is, because those two words, I think they've got to be taken together. They're terms of art for lawyers. We wouldn't have one without the other, so to speak. But one can exist without the other, because the Fourth Amendment just says officers have to act reasonable. And to detain, though, you've got to have a reasonable suspicion that the person's involved in something, some crime. Our problem becomes in society that people usually report others. People will say, that person's doing something. Those people are acting crazy over there. The cops may get a call. There's a car that's driving crazy. Here's what it looks like. Here's the license number. And they get behind it. But by the time the cops come to a scene or see a person, they don't see a crime going on. They don't see anything going on. They only have what someone told them. And if you look at many videos and things, the officers get there and get to a scene, and they'll say this. They'll say, because the person's fighting them, why are you talking to me? Why? Well, because someone called in and said there's a suspicious person sitting in a car. Someone called in and said there's a suspicious person looking in the windows. You see? So, from a cop standpoint, okay, well, let me go check it out. That's what we pay these people to do. That's their job. But when they get to the scene and they encounter you, reasonable suspicion kicks in, because they got to know, what were you doing? Dig this. We've seen this, and this is the popular thing now, that people are reporting people for doing very, very legal behavior. It's just, I don't like your behavior. I don't like that you're on my side of town. I don't like that you're using facilities I use. So there's this personal thing that's going on that gets reported to cops, and cops have to come out and now deal with the situation. So I'll play with Carm here. The cops are called out because I say, I see this woman right here. She's walking up and down the street, or she keeps walking around the block, and she's got some bags on her. And I've never seen her here in my neighborhood. Maybe she's casing the neighborhood to do burglaries and stuff. See, that's what's going through my mind. And I'm sitting in my house and I'm calling. Please send an officer out here to deal with this person. So, of course, what's going to happen? Okay, ma'am. They said we'll have an officer come out and take and see what's going on. So the officer comes out and they run into Carmen. Okay. And they say, hey, ma'am, what are you doing?
Am I free to leave?
Well, I don't know yet. I've been called out here because somebody said some suspicious lady is walking around. So I'm just trying to figure out what's going on.
Am I free to leave?
Well, I don't know yet. You got to let me investigate this crime that's going on. There might be a crime going on.
So I'm not free to leave.
Well, I don't know yet. You see, I get a call. They tell me to come out. What's your name? Can I have your ID?
Here's my ID.
So I'm going to run it. All right. But what are you doing out here? Looking at it. I understand you're walking around with these bags. What's going on?
If I'm not free to leave, I want my attorney.
I don't know why you're escalating this. I'm just out here investigating. I have a right to investigate these crimes.
If I'm not free to leave, I would like my attorney.
So now I got to huddle up. I got to figure out, well, what did she do? Because generally, when the cop comes to the scene, you see, they already approached her. They didn't go to the person who called and find out what exactly are they doing. Let's think about what she's doing. Walking around on the sidewalk. Is that legal conduct?
I believe that it is.
Okay. All right. I mean, and that's legal where? Everywhere?
Everywhere.
Okay. What about gated communities, though?
Even in gated communities.
Okay. I guess you can walk on the sidewalk legally then.
You can.
Okay, let's see. Carrying bags around.
That's legal.
Empty bags, maybe even?
That is also legal.
Oh, okay. Gosh, okay. Well, what about just going around in circles?
I'm allowed to walk around in circles as many times as I would like. Now, what the officer may try and do is flip it and say, well, we were concerned about Carmen's mental health. We thought with what the person had said about her work walking in circles, that maybe she was having some kind of a mental breakdown.
Well, they'll find that out right away. And all they can do is put a person in. But still, realize this. Why and what conduct has been reported? That's criminal.
Is a crime. None.
Right. The officer can say, you're being suspicious. They said someone's suspicious. But they say that if a guy's sitting in a car across the street from your house, he looks suspicious.
And what does that even mean? Even someone stating that someone looks suspicious is not a crime. Looking suspicious is not a crime.
Because it's all subjective. What's suspicious to me may not be suspicious to you.
And people that don't want you in their areas of town are going to find you to be suspicious no matter what you're doing.
That's true.
Another slightly different scenario is that when the officer contacts me, it turns out that I'm not even the woman that she was talking about. And that could come into play if she didn't give a specific detailed description of the clothing that the person had on, or the clothing is so general, it could match a number of women walking in that area.
And you've got to be brave in these situations. You really do.
But brave does not mean you got to be the tough guy. That's not what lawman means by brave.
Well, of course not. Brave meaning I'm brave enough to speak and think and act in accordance with the Constitution of the United States. I just say that because a lot of people just can't do it. They just can't. They have to argue. And out on the street corner is not the place to argue your case. Now, this thing, right, this call, So the cop, he has her detained
Because he won't
because
let me leave.
exactly, you see. So and I didn't touch her. I didn't do anything like that. In fact, I'm asking her questions still because I can. She does not have to answer them. But a lot of times, officers are going to do this. Look, if you just answer the question and I can verify that you're not doing nothing and we'll all be on our way. So just tell me what you're up to.
If I'm not free to leave, I would like my attorney.
Gosh, why are you being difficult?
If I'm not free to leave, I would like my attorney. And that is all that you need to say.
Exactly.
You don't need to engage in a, well, I'm here visiting my friend. I didn't know their address. I'm looking for it. You don't have to have those kinds of explanations, because either one of two things is going to happen. Either the officer has some suspicion that you committed a crime, whether it's reasonable or unreasonable, and he's going to detain you and maybe even eventually arrest you, or he's going to allow you to leave because he has no evidence that any crime has been committed.
Correct. And many times what you see is the officers will go back to the person who called and say, well, did you see him carrying a knife? Did you see him carrying a gun? I mean, okay, they didn't have anything. And this is what I call the huddle up moment. They got to huddle up. Okay, we got this person over here. This person stopped. Now, let's huddle up officers who have come as backup because they're always going to do that. So somebody comes and now they got to huddle up. Now they got to figure out, okay, you guys, what did she do? Well, she was clearly walking on the sidewalk. Um, she had some bags with her. You know, we know that, but like she said, none of that is against the law. And the person calling in, all they said was suspicious, right? And now we get back to that objective, subjective thing of what is suspicious. Well, anything's unknown could be suspicious. Anything I don't know about may seem suspicious, but you, as a citizen, can only be detained when the suspicion causes an officer to believe that you may be involved in criminal conduct. So if it's just suspicion because of you're a human, I think you're a human. I'm suspicious. Okay, then I am. And there's nothing you're going to be able to do about that. But they have to huddle up because now they got to figure out what is her actions reflecting that seems suspicious. And what's going to happen after the huddle up, because you don't help them even then, is they have to come to you and say, well, we can't determine that there was a crime occurring. Even being suspicious is not a crime, but you don't argue with them. And they have to let you go about your way. And you can walk around the block 10 times more if you want. But people, I'm going to tell you, look, what you're really doing is, if you think about it, is there's only one way to start a tennis match, right? There's only one way to start a football game. There's something that you do that you don't ever do while the game's going, and that's serve, and that's kick off. They have kicked off when they approach you and ask you questions. When they attempt to stop you, they're kicking off, and the game is on. So you're either going to play what? Offense, defense, right? I mean, something's going to happen. And there's certain people when they're approached, they're going to play offense. What are you doing? Why are you messing with me? You know, all of these things. That's when that starts coming out. But to play defense, you got to be cunning because you don't know the play that's called, but you can recognize the formation. You know, this might be a screen pass right here. And so you might holler out, screen, to let all your teammates know. But here you're all alone. But you see the screen pass. And all it's telling you to do is, am I free to leave? That's all. That's the defensive play. Am I free to go? Because you have to establish this is a detention and not a consensual conversation. If you're the type of person who want to talk to cops all the time, please talk to them. That's you can. I'm not saying don't do that, but the Constitution and Rohrer case law, Supreme Court of the United States says you don't ever have to talk to them ever, and you're not talking to them is no reasonable suspicion to detain.
Because the officer may try and get you to believe that it is. Well, you must have been doing something out here wrong if you're not willing to tell me why you were out here.
Right. And when we talk about arrest, that's another whole standard. You see, they need more than just being called out because I'm walking around the block. They got to take that reasonable suspicion now and develop it into what's called probable cause. Another term of art, and people will, what the heck does that mean? Probable cause? What do you probably cause? What do you mean? Here's what it means. I, with information, have a strong suspicion that you were involved in a crime or were about to be involved in a crime. But it's a strong suspicion based on evidence, information. You're going to need somebody to say when they go back and they talk to the person who called you out and they say, well, she wasn't just walking, you see, she was taking pictures of houses or something. Or she was going up to the doors and knocking on the doors and then keep walking. Okay, now we're moving a little bit more towards some conduct. But if I'm taking pictures from the sidewalk, I can do that all day. If I walk up to the door and knock, I can do that. So where is the description of a crime? Where is now probable cause? Strong suspicion that a crime is occurring.
And let me say, we're using these terms, but we don't want you saying to the officer, well, officer, you don't have reasonable, articulable suspicion to stop me. That's not what we want you to do. Again, that's our fight if there's a court case. Or if you feel that the officer violated your rights in such a way that there's a civil case, then that would be your civil attorney's job to fight that fight for you. I would notice that there is a question in the chat. I'll read it and I'll let you answer it, lawman. If they ask you if you are on probation or parole, do I have to tell them if I am? Lawman?
Yes. Here's how you handle that. First thing is, am I free to go? And if they say no, are you on probation parole? Yes, if you are. But you still, am I free to go? Now, I want to tell you why. Because if, in fact, we do not challenge an officer coming up and just saying, are you on probation? Those are pretext type stops. Those are not reasonable to just ask every person you see, are they on probation parole? But it would not be wrong for you to say, am I free to go? Because the officer will tell you, no, you're not. And then you are detained. And like I said, they don't have to touch you. You can be sitting down, minding your own business on a bench.
But if you're not free to go, you are detained.
And because you're on probation and parole, you have waived your right to be free from searches and seizures.
Well, that's not 100% true. There are some grants of probation that do not have search conditions on them.
What? What are you talking about?
Not every grant of probation involves search and seizure.
Well, wait a minute now. I remember the judge sentenced me. He said, I thought I heard him say, you will submit yourself anytime, day and night, with or without parole. I thought I heard something like that.
Now, if the judge did say that, then you are on a grant of searchable probation, but you have to know the terms and conditions of your probation. And not every probation is a searchable probation. Now, in Sacramento County, they tend to almost make every probation a searchable probation. But there are instances where that is not a condition of your probation. And if that is not a condition of your probation, they cannot search you without your consent or without probable cause or a warrant.
Well, But how am I supposed to know? I mean, they put me on probation.
And
I
that
don't know.
and that's why you should have received a copy of your probation terms that told you specifically what the terms of your probation were. So don't automatically assume because you're on probation that you are subject to search. Now, parole is a different issue. If you're on parole, you are subject to search. I've yet to see a person who's been on parole that has not been subject to search, because when you are on parole, you are technically considered to still be in the custody of the state prison system, CDC. It's just that you're not physically living within their facility.
Wow. So I guess you should probably go look and make sure that you are under a searchable condition, because it's legal to divvy them out. It's and when are they going to put those on? What kind of crimes? What are we talking about?
They tend to put the searchable probations, they like to put them on felonies, but there are some felonies where it is not applicable.
What
But
if?
they tend to
Yeah,
put them on cases that involve guns, drugs, theft, um, uh, most any case that
violence.
involves violence. Yes.
Okay, so mostly you might be on a grant of probation that has a search feature to it.
But there are plenty of people who are also on misdemeanor grants of probation,
Hmm.
some of which may be searchable, others are which may not be. So
Wow.
know your specific terms and conditions. You should have received paperwork that told you what your conditions of probation were. In Sacramento County, you get if it's misdemeanor probation, you get like a one-page document, and it's pre-printed and it has boxes that are checked. If the search and seizure box is checked, then you're subject to search and seizure with or without probable cause. If it is not checked, you are not. And if you don't have that information, contact the attorney who represented you. If it was the public defender's office, contact the public defender's office, or contact the court to try and get a copy of that document.
Of your minute order is what you're looking for. And what a minute order is, it just records what happened in court, from who's there to what they pled to the sentence, to everything that goes on is going to be reflected in the minute order. Now, before we go on, this probation parole thing. Someone said, I mean, I give up my Fourth Amendment rights when I have that, right? I mean, does it mean does it mean that they can't now even detain me? Because I don't have a sign that says on probation on my chest. So how do they know to ask me that?
They still have to have reasonable articulable suspicion for contacting you. And again, if they attempt a conversation with you and you converse, most courts are going to say that that was consensual contact. And that is why, once again, we're harping on the fact that you need to ask, are you free to leave? And even if you are on probation, that is still a question that you can ask,
Correct.
that you should ask.
Yeah, because all you're doing is establishing the groundwork for what's about to happen next. That's all.
And I believe, Lawman and I have both had cases where our client was on probation, but they were illegally detained. And as a result of that, we were able to prove in court that the detention, the stop, was illegal to begin with.
Right.
And then it didn't matter that that person was on probation, because the officer would not have known that information but for that illegal stop or detention. Now, where the officer knows you and knows that you are on probation, that's a little bit of a different circumstance.
And only because the officer now has more information to add to the mix. In fact, there's a new case out, and I talk about it a lot because what happened is there's a high crime area, so that means black or brown, and the officers are there in one part of that area, and a lady comes by in her car and she pulls up next to them and she says, there's four black guys in a car down there and they're acting shady. That's it. They're acting shady. So what do the officers do? So they go two cars, four officers, parked behind the car, which was legally parked, turn on the lights. Are they detained at that point? Well, no. But what they do is they get out, two go to one side, two go to the other side. They're all next to the doors of the vehicle. So
You
that
mean two of the
the
officers get out?
yes, four officers, two on one side, two on the other. They're at the doors of the vehicle, tinted windows. But what happens next is they hit on the window to contact the person. Are they detained then? Hmm. It would seem that if I got officers at all four doors of my car, I may feel that I'm not free to leave, like she was talking about when they come with guns. So if I feel that they're not free to leave, well, what do I do in that situation? Well, what happened in the case is they did challenge the detention because right after that, they hit the window comes down, cops, they don't find any shady activity. See, remember, it was supposed to be shady, right? But all they did was come over and immediately post up.
And again, shady is subjective, and shady is not a crime. One
That's
person's
right.
view of what shady is different than another person's view. So one person may think it's shady because you're sitting in your car eating your lunch, but you're in your neighborhood and they've never seen you before.
Right,
That's not a crime.
right. So the officers, though, are, they figure shady means they're doing something illegal. So they take them, they now taking them out the car, IDing them. They search the car and they find guns and stuff, contraband. So the problem becomes how did they challenge that? Well, it turns out that maybe some people may have been on probation or parole inside the car. But you see, that would not be determined until they have ran their name and things like that.
Until they've detained them
That's right.
and contacted them.
Being illegally detained is wrong. And people don't know that because it usually leads to an arrest and then the arrest, all right, I'm doing a crime. But just the detention alone is that first level where you are now given in to the system. You are doing something that you did not want to do. So the courts looked at that because the juvenile court said, hey, this is a great stop. What are you talking about? This is beautiful. Kids are guilty.
They
Boom.
basically said stop was fine. Law
Yeah.
enforcement could contact them and detain them because somebody said they were shady.
Right.
And there was no problem with it. And it turns out they were
Right.
shady because they had stuff in their car. But
Right.
that's not the end all be all
Right.
of that story.
So the kids, and I say kids because it was a juvenile case. The kids fought it with emotion. They lost in the trial court and they appealed.
To a higher court.
Yes, because they pled guilty after that. You say they pled guilty. So they appealed to a higher court. The higher court said, well, the first thing we got to look at is, was it a proper detention, a proper stop? Well, they didn't pull them over, right? Okay. They got behind them. They turned on lights. Well, okay. I don't know if they saw the lights, but yeah, we had our lights on. And they walked up four deep and went by each door, which is an indication that I don't want nobody to get out this car.
I think they even went a little further. Weren't their hands actually on the
car?
On the vehicle?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, but that's what I mean is that they posted up at all four
And
doors.
so if there's an officer at each door of your four-door car, it would be clear to a reasonable person that you can't leave.
Right. They don't want you to get out of there. So the appellate court said the analysis is, did they have reasonable suspicion to detain? So what did they do? What was the reasonable suspicion, you see? Shady. They're in a black car, parked legally, shady. Now, when they get there, the officers didn't see smoke coming out the windows. They didn't obviously see a gun lying on the seat. You see? Where did it go from shady to a crime or criminal behavior at all? So the appellate court said, we're following the law because the law says even you got to articulate, why are you detaining someone?
And not just articulated, but that articulation must be reasonable,
Right.
and you must be able to articulate it
Right.
at the time, not some made up fact. Because sometimes officers will come in after the fact and during a hearing and they wrote in the report that they stopped you for reason X. But
Right.
when they come in to testify, they say that they stopped you now for reason Y.
And Z. I mean, and why not? Right. I mean, it's like throwing stuff up on the wall and seeing what will stick. Because you got to believe, look, they know the law too. So if they
They
don't,
don't know it well. The
they
majority
know
of they
something.
should,
They
but
know
they don't.
enough, and they know enough to violate it.
That they do.
So if they do that, that's why on
But
appeal, the court, what they did is they said that's a bad stop. That is a bad detention.
And so, despite the fact that somebody, and I forget if it
Called
was
in.
one or
Yeah.
more, was on probation in
True.
that car, the evidence that was found was thrown out because the detention was illegal to begin with, because there was no crime being committed. And there was no
reasonable
suspicion
that
that a crime was being committed.
Right.
Now, the trial courts did not reach that determination. And that's why sometimes the fight isn't over in the trial court. And
Right.
that's the reason we have appellate courts, because the trial courts don't always get it right.
Right. The trial court are just judges doing a job. And then look,
They're supposed to follow the law.
that's right. But sometimes they're not legal eagles either, And sometimes I think they can allow things because of what they see and hear. If you were in war, you're jumpier. You're always reacting to things when war is not there because of your experience in war. So just like cops, just like judges, they believe something may be there when it might not be there because of their experiences. So the trial judges were clearly wrong, but the appellate court actually had to send it back to the trial court to take evidence as to whether or not somebody knew somebody in the car prior to posting up. So what they call remand the case back to the trial court and let trial court take evidence, because no evidence is taken on the appellate level. But the case stands to show that even if you're in that car and you're on probation and parole, both, and you got guns and stuff, you got all kinds of contraband,
They still have to have.
still have to have a reasonable suspicion that crimes are being occurring or would occur, something like that. And by somebody saying somebody's shady in a car, that's not enough.
It is definitely not enough. And one of the things that I think sometimes we see with the lower court judges or the trial judges is they want to be supportive of law enforcement. Now, whether that is conscious or subconscious,
Right.
It plays a part in the decisions that they make about whether or not the officer's actions were reasonable. And that's why if we lose the fight in the trial court, we always appeal it.
Yeah, you want to, and you can. One thing that brings up is, well, do cops and judges have implicit bias? Right? I mean, do they feel like, well, everybody's guilty, or they must be doing something, right? Because of this. Well, probably so. I mean, that is the nature of our society, is bias. And when we deny that we all have biases, then we're doing ourselves a disservice. And it's bias every way. Which way? We all have it. And the reason you know that is because look at any item, look around, something happens to you. What do you first think about? You say, what is your first thought? And if your first thought is this, but it turned out that situation was that might be a bias you have. And there's nothing wrong with it. You just have to learn to control it and not let it out when there's business going on, when there's things happening that is important to lives. So we talked about that, you see, on this reasonable suspicion, right? But what is this probable cause thing, right? Well, it's more than reasonable suspicion. It is a strong suspicion that the crime or a crime has occurred, will be occurring, or, I'm thinking about doing it. Okay. And it's so know that to get the author to search me, my car, my bags, my house, there has to be another level of cause that the officers have to determine. And it's similar to something I thought we were looking at something before, this probable cause thing. Stop and frisk, okay? Because stop and frisk was this notion that came out that we're going to let officers not only stop someone, but frisk them, okay? Feel them up a little bit. Generally, that's called what, Carm?
The search that the officers like to do for
Yeah,
officer
the pat
safety.
down for officer safety.
Yeah, don't describe it as the fill 'em up. That sounds a little.
I gotta touch you in places where there might be weapons, right?
That is true.
Okay.
Yes, and so it is what is traditionally known as a search for officer safety. But even to do that search, the officer must be able to articulate something specific about why he believes that you might have a weapon.
Right.
So, for example, if you have, if the officer knows you and knows that you have a history of carrying
Well,
firearms.
somebody called in and said, "Hey, that guy bald head with a red shirt. I saw him with a knife."
Yes.
See, somebody I saw him with a gun. Saw him with a what do you call it? A box cutter. See, something, to feel that, well, this person could have a weapon. Now, do they always have that? No, because stop and frisk started becoming, they were misusing it. It's a nice way to say it.
They were always misusing
Misusing
it. They were
and
always
so
misusing
it's
it.
been now frowned upon in most jurisdictions. Now, but the pat down for officer safety is still there. And here's the thing: you let them pat you down. You know why? Because if they thought you had a weapon, they can pat you down for what might be a weapon. But your keys in your pocket, the cocaine in my back pocket, may not be a weapon. So when they reach in and grab that, what did that have to do with a weapon?
And you don't make any statements
That's
or
right.
respond about whatever the officers found in your pocket. So if he reaches in your pocket and pulls it out and holds it up and says, "What is this?"
They make my pants, man.
I would
Hey.
nope, do not say that.
I don't know where that came
like
from.
my attorney is what you should be saying at that point.
You put that in there, cop. See, you can say a lot of stuff. You can exercise your First Amendment, but don't do it. Follow the law and be quiet. Shut up. Say the magic words. Am I free to go? You may not be, but you got to establish the nature of the relationship. And now you have, like in a tennis match, return to serve. It's always the hardest thing, right? That first return of the serve. It's the hardest thing to do. That's what I'm telling you. You got to practice this stuff. Yeah. And when you do, you will find that it is better to have your lawyers fighting for you in court than you'd be screaming out on the street corner.
Or for you to
killed.
not survive that
That's
encounter.
right.
And
because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. You see, that's really what it's all about.
Now, I did see a post the other day. I thought I had it here for us to share on the screen, but I don't see it. And it was basically a drawing of a person with their hands up, and it said, we stop, they shoot. We comply, they shoot. We ask why, they shoot. You know, what are we supposed to do? We realize that we can't possibly imagine every single situation that could occur with law enforcement. We realize that there are some officers out there that no matter what you do are going to make this a physical event. But what we want you to do is to survive that. And
de-escalate.
We're asking you, don't argue with them.
Right.
Don't fight with them.
That's right.
Leave that fight to us because we want you to live, to be alive, to share your life with your family
Right.
and not have them have to deal with that loss that we have seen so many others deal with over the years.
And you don't have to be aggressive. You don't. I mean, think of martial arts in a lot of ways. Most of it is being defensive. Is stopping something from hurting you and hitting you. It isn't punching. It's being able to stop a punch or to lessen the blow. So we're saying lessen the blow. Pay attention to the law. See, I love this because I get to tell you follow the law. It's for you. That's why it's here.
And if they've decided they're going to detain you, they're going to detain you no matter what you
Right.
say.
But you're laying the groundwork because the next step is they need probable cause to arrest you. And if they're going to arrest you, they're going to do it.
And we realize, like we said, they may not have that. They may not have that reasonable, articulable
Yeah.
suspicion. They may not have that probable cause, but they may arrest you anyway. And again, that is when the fight is for us, for the attorneys. Again, we can point to situations where the officers escalated. Even the situation we talked about at the beginning of this,
Right.
the officers escalated it by putting their hands on him. We see that in the Elijah McClain case. The officers escalated it. And he was just a young man
Walking home.
trying to get home.
And I think what we could do, what I'd like to do is next week, I want to do some studies. I want to watch some situations, play the video, and take it step by step as to what was done, what should have been done, and how you do react to officers when they come at you because they like to ask questions. Boy, do they like to ask questions.
And they also like seeing action sometimes, whether
Sure.
their adrenaline is hyped up. Oh, here's somebody, or we know him.
Well, because they believe that most situations, every situation they're called to, they're going to have to do something. It's on, so to speak.
And a lot of their training teaches them that it's the bad guys versus
Right.
the good guys. And they're the good guys.
Right.
And whoever is out there that they've been called for is a bad guy.
Right. So they have to do their jobs. And I think what we are telling you is you're just forcing them to do their job and do it
I'm going to
properly.
disagree with you there, lawman. I'm going to disagree with you there because these officers are doing things that are outside of their job. If you are working a homeless unit and your part of your duties is actually to help the homeless, and you see a homeless guy that you know, and we know a lot of homeless people have mental issues,
Oh, yeah.
whether it's minor or it's bad, and you physically grab that person because you thought they might have been jaywalking, you're not doing your job. Those officers were not doing their job. And there are plenty of occasions that we see in encounters where they're not doing their job. Yeah, if they wanted to detain George Floyd, that was fine. Detain him because somebody called in and said that he used a fake 20. But what they did was not doing their jobs. You don't get to just kill someone, which is what we saw in that case.
Well, then we're going to have an episode then, Carmen. Okay. In that episode, we're going to have to talk about what to do when officers are not doing their job. You see, because you bring up Floyd. In that situation, he was detained from the time they took him out the car. He was brought here, brought there, and then brought there. And we all got to watch. So he was detained. He was under arrest, right? The only thing left to do is take him down to the station, book him in, let the legal system roll. But they interfered with it somehow. And I know, like when I say something like they have to do their job, meaning I'm not going to go out and stop somebody and put them in handcuffs and things like that. So somebody's going to go out and react to someone's call. Now, their job may be to react, but it is not to violate the law.
And it's also not to judge the person that they're there to detain. That is not their job at all. Detain that person, arrest that person. The decision about whether or not that person actually committed a crime, that's going to be either up to a judge or up to a jury.
Yeah, but you know what? I've been a law officer for 20 years, and I'm gonna tell you, most of the time, these people got it in for me. They don't like me. I go out and they're aggressive and stuff. So I gotta be ready for that. You can't tell me these people got my best interest in mind. I want to go home at night. So what do you say to that, ma'am?
One, the officers get to go home at night. Officer, uh, uh, Officers getting injured on the job by people that they're arresting are few and far between.
Could
So
be
the
me though.
so the officer is going to go home at night. He doesn't get to violate the law so that he can go home at night, but the person that he was sent there to contact doesn't get to go home at night. He still has to follow basic procedures. And part of the reason that we're seeing these cases is that their officers are not properly trained. And so they immediately resort to their guns other than other less lethal forms of force.
Yeah, it could.
And also, what we're seeing, because when we do this show that Lawman talked about, where we're looking at different encounters, we can look at encounters that involve people who are not people of color and see that they get a different level of treatment.
Somewhat
So that
leniency.
again goes back to that bias that plays a part in how the officer reacts based on who he is there to detain.
Correct. And
I think
we got how many minutes
I
left?
think we have exceeded
Okay, our time.
our time for today.
But
We do have a
there's one
question.
little thing. Yeah, someone asked this one little question, and it's pretty easy. Cops look, when the cops come to your door, your home, they cannot enter without a warrant or what's called exigent circumstances. Okay? And we can talk about this one day. But the basic rule is cops come to your house, they should have a warrant to come in and search. If you choose to open the door, which you don't have to, right? Think about it. I'm not opening it for the Jehovah Witness. I ain't opening it for the salesperson, right? I'm gonna hide and peek around the corner and do all that, or I'll just sit there and wait till they go. So why do you think you have to open it for the officers? If they have a warrant, oh, they're coming in, and
Whether
you will know that,
whether
okay?
whether you open it or not.
And if they don't, then they're there for another reason, but you still don't have to open the door. But let's say you do, Carmen. Can they just,
Well, they're not supposed to. So if we talk about lawfully, we have to talk about what lawfully they can do. And lawfully, if they don't have a warrant and you are not consenting to them to come in, they should not be coming in. But in reality, what we know is that sometimes if that door gets opened to crack, the officer is pushing his way and coming into your house. Again, we don't want you fighting with them because that will be our fight when we prove that that entry into your home was illegal.
and the way it's illegal is that they need to have that exigent circumstance. You notice all these words are words you don't use every day. Nobody uses them every day but us.
Exigent
Okay.
meaning it's an emergency. So, for example, they're chasing a bank robbery suspect and they think that they see him run into your house or into your apartment.
Right.
That would be an emergency circumstance, an exigent circumstance
Right.
that would allow them to enter to look and see if that person is hiding within that home.
And I know a couple of more because you open the door. The officer now may see inside your house. And an exigent circumstance would be somebody in the house saying, help, help, or stop beating me, stop doing this. They're hearing gunshots or something. Now the cops are going to come through. That's what an exigent circumstance is.
Some kind of emergency situation that requires them to act right then.
Yes. It could even be that you open that door and you forgot you got a pile of cocaine on the table. You just forgot.
But they saw it.
But they see it. Now It may be exigent simply because if you close the door, you're going to destroy the evidence they just saw in plain view. In plain view, it's one of the reasons without a warrant they may get in.
Now, what happens if that wasn't cocaine, but it was just sugar?
Hey, they still, that's why you do this. That's why you don't fight. That's why you don't trip. You see, if they do that, you then have to calm down and not, hey, that's just sugar, that's just sugar, because they're going to go into fight mode. You just stand out the way. And if it's sugar, they'll find that out when they test it. But
He shouldn't be testing it like that.
well, of course not. I got my mask on. I don't know what the hell it tastes like, right? But the point is, look, if you want to open the door, you are opening the door because you are consenting for them to be there. You do never have to open the door for anyone in
Well,
your home.
opening the door is not necessarily a consent.
Oh.
Opening the door is not consent for them to come in.
To be there. They can't cross the threshold of your home,
But,
but you're encountering them
and
when you
allowing
open
them
the door.
potentially to see something else in your
That's
home
right.
that they can see
See,
from that vantage point.
that's right. And even the law will tell you that they probably could walk around the curtilage of your house
outside.
And if they see something going on, somebody's getting beat, something happening, exigent circumstance.
Well, I think that we have come close to time to end for tonight. I think Lawman may have had a few words that he wanted to say since this is our last show in this Black History Month.
I guess it is, isn't it? Well, first of all, I want to give a shout out to Barbara Yanamuro,
Yes.
former president of Wiley Manual Bar Association, and a beautiful lady who has always stood for justice in her life and her legal career. We've lost her this year. We also lost Judge Jimmy Long, a mentor of mine, very close to me. We love these people. We've lost several now. We're losing people all the time. So we do this stuff because we care about the law. And we want the law to apply properly to you. But sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, we want you to be educated enough and powerful enough to stand and fight against individuals who want to reduce your power.
But we don't mean physically fight.
Of course not. Of course not. I'm not saying you ran out here and beat up on officers and things like that yet. But, look, everyone wants to be respected. Everyone wants their day. Everyone wants to be able to go somewhere and come home at night. And for us as people, Black people, to live in fear that that won't happen or that will happen or, that I'll get home, we're almost in a war type state, It's like the brothers when they rap, they always talk about it. It's been many times. There's more war on the streets than war in the Middle East. There's more here than there. Our young Black men see more trauma than soldiers in war. And they have to live on. They have to go every single day. I mean, when I was little, I didn't want to walk by that area because I knew, damn, is today going to be the day something's going to happen? You don't want that kind of stuff, but that's what we live in. And that's why basically our hands are made strong. We've been a people who have survived unthinkable things. And I just say, we will survive on. But the better educated we are, the more we are ready to face anything that comes to us. So we're pouring our hearts out in this stuff, not for anything, but I love to educate people. I love to think about, wow, everybody should know this and everybody should exercise this. And Carm, tell them why you're here. What are you here for?
I'm here because we do want to make sure that the public is educated and informed. If you don't know about your rights, you can't properly exercise your rights, and someone can take advantage of that lack of knowledge. We don't want you to have that. We want you to be fully aware and fully engaged.
Exactly. Because the point is, let's get home tonight, right?
Let's get home tonight.
All right.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Tell your friends, please. Turn on the channel at Friday, 6 o'clock, and come courtside with Carmen B.
And Lawman.
Oh.